So he's building up to that final plague, setting up their deliverance there, where he's going to strike the firstborn of Egypt. And of course, the Lord informs Moses of this last plague and gave him instructions about what to do with the blood of the Passover lamb. And by faith, Moses keeps that. All right. And you figure Moses and Aaron here, they play as specifically Moses because Moses is acting as if he's God. God sets it up that way. Moses plays a crucial role. First, he had to do his part. Of course, God's going to keep his end of the bargain, but it also depended on the people following the instructions that God had given them concerning the Passover lamb. Because that destroying angel was going to come and wipe out the firstborn of anybody who didn't have that on their doorpost. So it was crucial to this plan. Specifically, God, of course, was going to do his part, but especially Moses keeping his part. And by faith, he does do it. By faith, he keeps that promise that God had made. So that God is going to bring about that deliverance. He realizes this is how God is going to fulfill that vision that he had back when he was 40, of bringing about that deliverance. The death of the firstborn is going to loosen Pharaoh's grip on Jacob's descendants. And one of the statements that God makes to Moses about this is in here in Exodus chapter 11, and let's look at verse 7. He says there, but against any of the sons, because he's talking about how there's going to be a great cry in Egypt because all the firstborn are going to be killed. But against the sons of Israel, a dog will not even bark, whether against man or beast, that you may understand how the Lord makes a distinction between Egypt and Israel. He's going to make that distinction between his people and the people of Egypt there, so that the destroyer would not touch them. For the guys here in the first century, of whom the book of Hebrews is written for, God's going to do the same thing for them in a way, where he's, instead of putting blood on their doorposts, he's going to have them flee Jerusalem. Because again, he's going to destroy Jerusalem because of their refusal to accept the Messiah. So again, in a way, they have to embrace that and follow those instructions to get out, and they do. Let's go to Matthew 24. Matthew 24, and let's start with verse 15. Starting with verse 15 here. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand, then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. Whoever is on the housetop must not go down to get the things out that are in his house. Whoever is in the field must not turn back and get his cloak. But to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies woe to those, sorry about that, and nursing babies in those days. But pray that your flight will not be in the winter or on the Sabbath, for then there will be great tribulation, such as has not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever will. Unless those days had been cut short, no life would have been saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. Then if anyone says to you, behold, here is the Christ, or there it is, do not believe him. For false Christs and false prophets will arise, and will show great signs and wonders, so as to mislead, if possible, even the elect. Behold, I have told you in advance. So if they say to you, behold, he is in the wilderness, do not go out. or behold, he is in the inner rooms, do not believe him. These first century brethren would eventually obey this. Jesus had made them a promise that Jerusalem was going to be destroyed. And like he said there, he told them in advance. They needed to get out when they saw that abomination of desolation there. They needed to get out of there. In fact, so fast, don't even go down to get your stuff. Just get out. And that's what he called them to do. In much the same way, like in the time of Moses there, if they didn't put the blood on that doorpost, they were going to get swept up in that judgment along with the Egyptians. The same thing here for these guys in the book of Hebrews. If they don't get out, they're going to get swept up in this judgment too. They're going to come a part of that. Now, they had been kind of losing endurance. They had been losing heart. They had been throwing away their confidence and kind of subtly drifting back to the things of the law and clinging on to those things. And they're being warned, if they continue to do that, they're going to get swept up in what Jesus described there. The worst there ever was. And you can read the account of Josephus. He talks about it. They're going to get swept up in there if they don't obey those instructions. Like Moses obeyed the instructions to avoid the wrath in his time. Well, the same thing for us as well. You know, there's some parallels for us in order for us to put blood on our spiritual doorposts. A judgment is coming for those who don't know God and don't obey the gospel. And like I said, we're to spiritually put the blood of the Passover lamb on our spiritual doorpost so that we don't get swept up in that as well. He's going to make a distinction between spiritual Israel and spiritual Egypt. He's going to perform somewhat of the same thing. Let's go to 2 Corinthians chapter 4. Second Corinthians chapter 4, and we can start reading with verse 16. Therefore, we do not lose heart, but though our outer man is decaying, yet our inner man is being renewed day by day. For momentary light affliction is producing for us an eternal weight of glory far beyond all comparison. While we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are unseen. For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things that are not seen are eternal. He's making a distinction between us and Egypt. Part of that distinction is we look towards those things which are eternal. We understand that we're being renewed inwardly day by day so that we don't lose heart. This is something that needs to be endured, something we need to hold on despite our circumstances. Because like he says there, for momentary light affliction is producing us an eternal weight of glory far beyond all comparison. What's ahead of us is far beyond all comparison. We need to embrace this distinction that he's making. And like Moses, continue by faith to hold on to the things of the Passover, to continue with those instructions like he did, although we do it in a spiritual sense today. Let's look at Philippians chapter 2. Now, we look forward to the eternal, where we are, where the fellowship we have is, and where the power we have is. We look forward to those things, as opposed to the world, which looks towards the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, the boastful pride of life. Now, Philippians chapter 2 says here, let's look at verse 14. Do all things without grumbling or disputing, so that you will prove yourselves to be blameless and innocent, children of God, above reproach, in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, among whom you appear as lights in the world. Like he says there, the way of this world is perverse, it's crooked, and we've been made his children. Those who have works set before us by God to be accomplished by faith that we can do without grumbling or disputing. We can, because we see that eternal weight of glory that's far beyond all comparison. That mission is the number one thing on our mind. So we can do so without disputing, without grumbling. And as a result of having that mindset, we shine in this ever darkening world there. And by default, we'll just stick out like a sore thumb, but in a great way. You figure we got a world here that doesn't know what truth is, that doesn't know what gender is, that doesn't know what marriage is, that considers us just a bunch of higher functioning animals. And in some senses doesn't even have that mindset, would even question why should our priorities be above animals' priorities. I've actually had discussions with people like that. Like, why is our life and our rights more important than animals? We've lost that stuff. And as the world continues down that path, in this country specifically, we will shine brightly. Like it says there in Romans, the creation is waiting for the sons of God to be revealed. Those truth seekers, they're looking for them. So we need to embrace that distinction. Put that blood on our spiritual doorpost. Stick out there. And what's destroying the world will pass over us. And we'll shine brightly in the midst of this generation. Also, another thing is kind of key, especially as far as what the guys in the book of Hebrews are looking to, and also in the time of Moses, is God has given us a heads up on his judgment. Like I said, he is going to judge those who don't know God and don't obey the gospel. He is going to judge him who formerly held us in bondage and holds people in bondage today. And we have a heads up on that. All right, let's go to 1 Peter chapter 4. First Peter chapter 4, and let's start with verse 1. Therefore, since Christ has suffered in the flesh, arm yourselves also with the same purpose. Because he who has suffered in the flesh has ceased from sin, so as to live the rest of the time in the flesh, no longer for the lust of men, but for the will of God. For the time already past is sufficient for you to have carried out the desire of the Gentiles, having pursued a course of sensuality, lust, drunkenness, carousing, drinking parties, and abominable idolatries. In all this, they are surprised that you do not run with them into the same excesses of dissipation. They malign you, but they will give account to him who is ready to judge the living and the dead. We're to arm ourselves for suffering, realizing that this is how we're going to be perfected. We are not going to take on the character of Christ unless we live the life of Christ, unless we have the attitudes of Christ and are willing to subject ourselves to that. If we really want to overcome sin, we're going to have that same mindset and be willing to subject ourselves to the things that he subjected himself to. God's will is our priority. They may malign us now, but when all is said and done, they're going to acknowledge the truth. They're going to see in the end that Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. And that judgment that he has coming it won't touch us. It will pass over us like it did in their time. And we will be free and be out of Egypt. Let's go back to Hebrews chapter 11. Let's look at verse 29. By faith, they passed through the Red Sea as though they were passing through on dry land. And the Egyptians, when they attempted it, were drowned. As we discussed, we discussed a little bit on Wednesday, from the time of Adam to Noah, man was kind of under the law of conscience. He had had a few revelations of God and just kind of a general revelation and things that they can deduce, from their own conscience, as it talks about there in Romans chapter 2. Mankind is able to figure out aspects of the character of God. That's why we're rightly judged. We're made in his image. Eternity has been put in our heart so that we would seek him, so that we would understand him. We have an inborn image of God, so that we are held accountable for not knowing this, even if we've never read the Bible. Because there should be some things by nature we should be able to come up with on our own, just by virtue of being made in his image. So from that time, man was just kind of under the law of conscience and had the capacity to figure out things about the nature of God. And of course, that brings us to the time of the patriarchs after that, where God starts instituting through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob his promises to basically bring about Christ and to initiate those promises through them. Finally, they go down to Egypt after reuniting with Joseph. Then hundreds of years later, now as a multitude, by the time you get to Moses, God through them is ready to institute the next step. God had exposed the gods of Egypt as frauds and demonstrated his power and his might. And he fulfilled his promise that he made to bring them out, and increasing the potential of people and increasing the number of people who know about him now. He has now made a nation which is going to be that base to which he's going to set up more stuff to finally bring about Christ, so that he can start to reconcile the whole world toward himself. The people of Israel accepted the instructions of Moses and they believed what he said. And God ended up making a way where there wasn't a way. He actually made it so that they could walk through the Red Sea there as if they were on dry land. And it's something for us to keep in mind as well, that a lot of what he has set forth for the Christian from an earthly point of view is impossible. But we need to realize that God can make a way where there isn't one. He's going to make it so that we can walk through the sea as if we're on dry land. And the same thing as far as character as well, and as far as the good works which he has prepared beforehand for us. And if you notice, when the Egyptians try to do it, what happens? They get overwhelmed by the sea. There's something for us to keep in mind there. Their oppressors, those who held them in slavery, did not come out of that water. That which held them captive. The same thing is for us as well. Because especially how it does there in Corinthians, this is a type of water immersion. That which held us captive did not come out of that water. We came out of that water a new, free people, new creations. All of that stuff died. The things of sin died in that water. That old man is gone. A new man has come. The same thing for here. By faith, as it says there in verse 29, they passed through the Red Sea. And the Egyptians, when they attempted it, they were drowned. The same thing, that old man was drowned. He did not come up out of that water. But we did as a new creatures. Let's go back to Hebrews chapter 11, verse 30. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell down after they had been encircled for 7 days. Unfortunately, those who passed through the Red Sea, not all of them held on it, obviously. And by faith, with the reports of giant men and heavily fortified cities came to their ears. Many had their faith shipwrecked. But the next generation trusted the Lord to bring about the victory through them. You figure those guys, they weren't atheists. It wasn't as if they didn't believe in God. They believed in him. What they didn't believe is that he would actually do what he promised through them. The same thing for us. He wants to accomplish this great reconciliation. He wants to accomplish the things of the new creation through us. He doesn't simply want us to just believe he exists. He understands that he exists. Everybody should understand that he exists. What he wants us to believe is that he could accomplish these victories through us, just like he did them. And sure enough, through their participation, they were able to bring down the walls of that city. And at one point, by faith, they were actually able to make the earth stand still in order to get the victory. And we have that sort of power on our side. Verse 31, Hebrews chapter 11. By faith, Rahab, the harlot, did not perish along with those who were disobedient, after she had welcomed the spies. Not just the people of Israel. As they were going along with the victories here, news had spread so that even the Gentiles were taking notice. And here you have Rahab. She could see which way the wind was blowing. And of course, she misdirects the soldiers and said, yeah, they left, when actually they hadn't. She trusted that God was going to continue to dominate. She saw which side was winning and which side was good, and she wanted to get on it. She trusted that God would bring this about. Because obviously, if this doesn't happen, she's a traitor. But she trusts that God's going to do it. And she's rewarded because of it. For these Hebrew Christians that the book of Hebrews is talking about, a judgment is coming their way. And they need to continue to embrace the things of the new creation, to continue to embrace the things of the new covenant, as opposed to sliding back to the old. A judgment is coming, and if they continue down the path that they're going to get swept up in it. He's going through the faith of his ancestors, starting with Abel and working their way so far up until Moses, showing that it's by faith they did this. By faith, God was able to work all these things through them. And they needed to hold on to this, to hold on to these, continue to participate in these promises, realizing that God is going to fulfill this through them. And so for us, we need to continue to embrace this will of God, to embrace this distinction that he's making between us and spiritual Egypt, to continue to look towards those things of eternity, to continue to shine as brightly as we possibly can, knowing that we'll draw those truth seekers out, and we'll have the honor of playing a part in God's grand working that he's had from eternity, something that he's always desired to do. And praise God, we get to participate in it. Something that is beyond comparison to anything we're going through right now. And that's all I have for today. Now I'm going to stop right there. And if nobody